What's going on all you gamers? Today I'm going to be going over the options that may well help you to get the best from your multiplayer experience of Halo Infinite. So if you want to know what options and settings to muck around with and tweak, then stay tuned, that's coming up next. Welcome back all you guys and girls, as always for all things gaming, for all things Xbox, then why not hit that subscribe and bell icon. Today I'm going to be going over the options and the settings that I tend to chuck on for my Halo Infinite multiplayer. Now remember, this is tweaked to my liking, it doesn't mean it'll be exactly the same for you. If you want to put something slightly adjusted, then do it to your own playstyle. But for myself, I found there are an absolute abundance of settings in Halo Infinite that can be tweaked, and some probably should be tweaked because they're not quite perfect as standard. So if we jump into the settings, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to the video. I would honestly say the field of view, for myself at the very least, obviously you're going to start down here, wherever the little marker is pretty much where you start as standard. I found the perfect one for myself was just up here, bang on 100 degrees. It works out really well. It doesn't give any kind of a, how can I put it, it doesn't tend to give any kind of a widened view. It's really nice, and the field of view for this seems to be perfect for me. I may have it round about slightly less if I wanted to, but I probably wouldn't go over 100 degrees. When I went all the way up to 120, although it looked really pretty, it seemed a little bit widened and I was missing a few of my shots. It didn't seem ideal. So 100 degrees just down here worked out exactly to my liking. Next up, and this one's down to your own preference, whether you want it to be quality or performance. I always chuck it to performance just in case, but if your computer's not struggling and if you have no issues with it, which to be perfectly honest, I've not noticed any issues when I was using it on the quality, but I've chucked it on performance anyway. If you find there's no difference whatsoever and everything seems to be handling fine, chuck it over to quality, which will just make the graphics a little bit prettier. Next up, and for the sensory, just chuck the blur all the way down. Nobody tends to like blur in games much anyway, and when you're going to be playing a competitive game, you want to be able to see everything as clear as possible. So chuck that down to 0. Screen shake, same again, I chuck it down to 0. It's more of a hindrance than anything else. The exposure is completely up to you. I've chucked it down to around about 50% just so it doesn't put me off as much. And for the full screen effects, I've left that exactly as it was. I didn't really want to muck around with this too much because as you see on the right, it sets the transparency such as the shield recharge or equipment use. I'm pretty much used to this being as it is, so this one worked out fine. Nextly, speed lines, completely up to you. It doesn't throw you off too much, it just means when you're running, you're going to be seeing slight dash marks beside yourself showing you that you're running or sprinting. I've turned it off just so that I can see pretty much everything, but it's completely your choice. Sharpening, again, I found this fine as it was. Leave it at 60%, seemed to be perfect. Now going over to the controller, and this will be the biggie because it will be a lot of the reason why you're either hitting shots, missing shots, or just not having any luck on Halo Infinite whatsoever. And the main thing I've done, I've left my buttons mapped to exactly as they are. This will depend on pretty much what controller you've got. If you've got an Elite controller or a Scarf or any of the really expensive ones, you may want to swap around, map the buttons how you feel works best for your playstyle. I'm going to leave it as standard for now and just show you what I think with the other settings. So the main one, and this one's probably the biggest one, is the look acceleration. Set the acceleration for the look thumbstick. Basically meaning when you're looking around how fast it will actually be. This is the delay between when you've pressed left all the way or right all the way or up all the way. As soon as you hit that outer border, the delay between the movement. Now it starts off as 2 at standard. If you've got it set at 2 and every person you're playing against has it stuck all the way over here at 5, you're going to be at a slight disadvantage because they will have a slightly faster turn ratio on you. So I would say 2 is probably too low. Now every single bone in my body tells me to smash it all the way up to 5 because then you have no delay and that will work 100% best. I've played quite a few matches now, and as soon as I chucked it down to 4, I have no idea why it shouldn't exist, but I had more luck. I tended to play a little bit better. Now honestly, I think this is probably just me, and 5 would be ideal for most players. If you're really good on Halo, chuck it on 5. For myself, I'd say give it a try at 4. I am nowhere near a pro, I am very casual at first person shooters, but this definitely worked out best for me at the moment. Now the look sensitivity, I left it slightly at 5 and then went slightly above and put it to 5.5 6. Any of those seem to be pretty much perfect. I wouldn't go anywhere other than that. 5.5 seem to be perfect for me. Look sensitivity on the vertical, I chucked just one above at 6, meaning it was pretty much exactly the same as the horizontal, except I found this helped a tiny fraction to look up and get the headshots if someone was jumping and I needed that last hit. Now for the zoom levels, I must admit I haven't had anywhere near enough time to check these out properly. I have put it to 1.1 for the normal sensitivity of the scope of 1.4, but you'll be able to tweak all of these to your liking. So say for example you've got a 10 times zoom effect going on, you'll be able to tweak that sensitivity all the way up to 2.0 if you want to. At the moment I would highly suggest keep it all as standard, and if you need to, just tweak it as you go when you get used to more of the weapons and such. For the moment, the only one I've changed slightly is this one of a variance of 1.1, as it seemed to make things tiny fraction better for myself. But even at 1.0, it worked out fine. Now next up, and we're going to be going over the dead zones, and this will all depend on how your controller is. If you've got a really nice controller, it's brand spanking new, you've got no issues with it, the thumb sticks are pretty much perfect and do not drift in the slightest, you may be able to lower these a lot more than I have. But for myself, I went through 3 controllers and this seemed to be the one that worked out perfect on all of them. Some of them were a little bit older and the sticks weren't that great. So I would say just have a little look, go into a match and see how this works out for you. But what you're going to be looking at is the center dead zone. So if you look on the right, it says the lower value feels more responsive, but the higher it is reduces the drift. Meaning, like I said, if you go into a match and you're moving all over the place, you will have to bop it all the way up higher. Almost definitely not this high, because then you're going to have a very unresponsive thumbstick. But you're going to have to try and put it up in increments of probably 1.0 I'd imagine, and just see how you go. For myself, starting off at 5 worked out absolutely perfect. Next up, and you've got your max input threshold. Again, just read the text over on the right and it's going to give you a really big hint on what's going on, because a lot of these settings are quite advanced and not on every game. So set how far the thumbstick is from the edge before your maximum input registers, meaning when you're holding onto that analog, as soon as you're going to hit that outer edge when you're holding left or right or any which way but loose, and as soon as you do, that's when it's going to start to register. Obviously, the higher up you've got this one reduces how slowly you turn, so the higher the better on this one. So if you wanted it to be absolutely the most responsive you would have it, it would be bopped all the way up to 15. I found that 10 worked absolutely perfect. Again, if you wanted it to be slightly slower, you would chuck it all the way down. I probably wouldn't recommend having it at 0, as that would definitely not work out in your favour. If you want it to react a little bit faster, you're going to put it slightly above that and make your way towards the end. Next up, and for the axial dead zone, again, like I said, 5 worked out best for me. It seemed to be a really nice number that kind of worked on all of my controllers, some of which were used quite a bit. Again, if you go into a match and you find you're getting a bit of stick drift, just raise it in increments and see how you get on. The higher it is, the more drift you're going to reduce. Meaning if you had everything on 15, your stick should not shake in the slightest, you should not be moving around, you should be completely dead center, but when you're trying to aim that lefty righty, it will be delayed slightly more than other players in the game, so you will probably be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Next, coming up to the center dead zone, and for the life of me, I am not gonna lie, I didn't really 100% find any difference when I was mucking around with this. The only thing I can think of is when you're returning to the center, it means how responsive it is to going back to center. So if I was holding down and then I let go of it, it would be reduced if I had it all the way down. If I had it higher, then it would mean it basically reduces all of the drift you have. But to be perfectly honest, whenever I tweaked this, I didn't find much of a difference. 5 again seemed perfect. If you do have any issues and maybe you're still having a bit of drift on your sticks and your analogs, then you may need to up this a little bit more. But 5 seemed perfect myself. If you want it as fast as possible, the same as the others, you're going to pop it all the way lower. I would say just go into a match, probably a bot lobby, and just see which ones work best for you. If you can manage to put it slightly lower without moving around, it will mean that when you're activating those analogs, you will get slightly less delay, and it will make things nice and easy when you're playing the game. Now next up, and we've got max input threshold. Now I left this exactly where it was, I tweaked it a little bit, but ultimately I found this to be perfect as standard. And this says lowers the value, increasing the variance in the acceleration curve. The higher the value reduces, the slower the turning. So meaning if I had it all the way up here, that I would be able to turn slightly faster, but obviously the acceleration curve would be then a little bit less. I found 10 as standard worked perfect, so I left that one pretty much as it was. And finally, the axial dead zone, exactly the same as the rest. I bopped it to 5, it worked perfect for me. If you need to tweak it to your own settings, do so after, like I said, you've gone into a bot lobby and seen what works for you. But again, the higher the value, the more it's going to affect your drift, meaning 15 will be max, and if you've got issues with your older controller, meaning this would be the highest value you would want to put on to make sure that it's got no drift when you're in the match. Obviously 15 is probably not what you're aiming for because you'll be at a bit of a disadvantage. 5 or lower, I probably wouldn't put it all the way down, because unless you've got a complete mint out of the box controller, it's going to mean that something's going to drift somewhere and you're going to have a bit of issues. Right, all you gamers, they're kind of the main ones that you need to tweak to your liking to make sure that things work out best for you in that multiplayer experience. But ultimately, like I said, with the dead zones and such, it will depend on your controller. Main thing to remember, the lower it is, the more responsive, the higher it is pretty much in everything, is going to make your analogs have a little bit less drift. So if you have an older controller, you're going to want to keep using increments to see exactly when it will be that you're standing still and not moving around without touching the controller. But ultimately, I found 5 to be a magic number on pretty much all of my controllers, but again, tweak to your own liking and preference. Go into a few matches, and I would say one of the main things that you should be doing, try some of these settings, maybe move it around a little bit to your own liking, but make sure that you use them for a while. If you're tweaking these settings between, say, every couple of matches, you're not going to get used to the actual controls anyway. It's going to be different each time, and getting used to how you've selected your settings will mean that you're becoming better at the game anyway. So I would say use these settings, give or take, depending on how old your controller is, and then from there, just use them for a couple of days. If you don't like them, adjust them after that. See if you've got something that you like slightly better. But you're definitely going to want to give them a couple of days playthrough, because if you don't, you'll be tweaking your controls so much that you won't actually get used to them as such, and you'll probably play slightly worse because of that. Right, well, you gamers, hopefully that's helped a few of you guys and girls out. As always, 4 Things Gaming, 4 Things Xbox. Take care. I'll see you on next day.